So yeah, welcome to Bedtime Stories with the Architecture Foundation. I'm Kathryn Timmins and I'm part of the regeneration team at the GLA, and I teach making cities at the Bartlett. I also co-run a studio at Manchester School of Architecture called Praxis, and that's a feminist architecture unit focusing on intersectionality and design. So thanks to Alicia and Rosie for having me tonight. And what I'm going to be reading is excerpts from this. It's actually just from an essay from that gigantic volume, but the essay is called The Generic City by Rem Koolhaas. And it's part of that huge book. And in there is kind of a collection of different projects and essays and thoughts and conversations. But this is the thing that really stood out for me, but I definitely have not read the whole thing. This essay, I think, prods at our understanding of modern cities, and it kind of asks questions and is purposely provocative, which I find really interesting. And it pushes our thoughts of what contemporary urban life is and where it's heading. But to me, I see this text as a warning of the dangers of sameness. With gentrification and the voices of only the few heard, I think we're edging towards this danger. We're edging dangerously towards the generic and exclusive places that function only for the few and represent only the ideals of those who are heard. So Rem suggests in this text that the contemporary city we now live in is also moving in that direction and becoming generic. And he's collected a sort of series of statements and questions split up into sections such as politics and culture, architecture, society. And that's to show us what the generic city could look like from these different points of view. It's asking, with gentrification, regeneration, historic preservation, mass tourism, chain restaurants, replicable experiences, false facades, he's suggesting that all cities are being stripped of identity and becoming the same. And he's asking, what does this mean? So I'm going to move around a bit in the essay because it's just a bit too long to read the whole thing. So I will be skipping out lots of interesting things. So, but I just want to give you a flavour, and the essay is free online as well. You can download it as a PDF. And also the final reason that I chose this is it's really visual, and I thought it might give you some trippy dreams. So, yeah, let's make a start. I hope you've all got a drink and you're all cosy. So, the generic city is a city liberated from the captivity of centre, from the straitjacket of identity. The generic city breaks with this destructive cycle of dependency. It is nothing but a reflection of present need and present ability. It is a city without history. It's big enough for everybody. It is easy. It does not need maintenance. If it gets too small, it just expands. If it gets old, it just self-destructs and renews. It is equally exciting or unexciting everywhere. It is superficial, like a Hollywood studio lot. It can produce a new identity every Monday morning. The generic city is what is left after large sections of urban life crossed over to cyberspace. It is a place of weak and distended sensations, few and far between emotions, discreet and mysterious, like a large space lit by a bedlamp. Compared to the classical city, the generic city is sedated, usually perceived from a sedentary position. Instead of concentration, in the generic city, individual moments are spaced far apart to create a trance of almost unnoticeable aesthetic experiences. The colour variations in the fluorescent lighting of an office building just before sunset, the subtleties of the slightly different whites of an illuminated sign at night. Like Japanese food, the sensations can be reconstituted and intensified in the mind. Or not, they may simply be ignored. This pervasive lack of urgency and insistence acts like a potent drug. It induces a hallucination of the normal. In a drastic reversal of what is supposedly the major characteristic of the city, business, the dominant sensation of the generic city is an eerie calm. The calmer it is, the more it approximates the pure state. The generic city addresses the evils that were ascribed to the traditional city before our love for it became unconditional. The serenity of the generic city is achieved by the evacuation of the public realm, as in an emergency fire drill. The urban plane now only accommodates necessary movement. Fundamentally, the car. Highways are a superior version of boulevards and plazas. Taking more and more space, their design seemingly aiming for automotive efficiency is in fact surprisingly sensual, utilitarian pretense entering the domain of smooth space. The generic city is fractal, an endless repetition of the same simple structural module. It is possible to reconstruct it from its smallest entity, a desktop computer, maybe even a diskette. Golf courses are all that is left of otherness. The generic city has easy phone numbers, not the resistant 10-figure frontal lobe crunchers of the traditional city, but smoother versions, their middle numbers identical, for instance. Its main attraction is anime. The airport. Once manifestations of ultimate neutrality, airports now are the most singular characteristic elements of the generic city, its strongest vehicle of differentiation. They have to be, being all the average person tends to experience of a particular city. Like a drastic perfume demonstration, photomurals, vegetation, local costumes give a first concentrated blast of the local identity. Sometimes it is also the last. Far away, comfortable, exotic, polar, regional, eastern, rustic, new, even undiscovered, those are all the emotional registers invoked. Thus conceptually charged, airports become emblematic signs imprinted on the global collective unconscious in savage manipulations of their non-aviotic attractors. Tax-free shopping, spectacular spatial qualities, and the frequency and reliability of their connections to other airports. In terms of its iconography or performance, the airport is a concentration of both the hyperlocal and hyperglobal. Hyperglobal in the sense that you can get goods there that are not available even in the city. Hyperlocal in the sense that you can get things there that you get nowhere else. The tendency in airport gestalt is towards ever greater autonomy. Sometimes they're even practically unrelated to a specific generic city, becoming bigger and bigger, equipped with more and more facilities unconnected to travel. They are on their way to replacing the city. The in-transit condition is becoming universal. Together, airports contain populations of millions, plus the largest daily workforce. In the completeness of their facilities, they are like quarters of the generic city, sometimes even its reason for being, its centre, with the added attraction of being hermetic systems from which there is no escape, except to another airport. The street is dead. That discovery has coincided with frantic attempts at its resuscitation. Public art is everywhere, as if two deaths make a life. Pedestrianisation, intended to preserve, merely channels the flow of those doomed to destroy the object of their intended reverence with their feet. The generic city is on its way from horizontality to verticality. The skyscraper looks as if it will be the final, definitive typology. It has swallowed everything else. It can exist anywhere. In a rice field or downtown, it makes no difference anymore. The towers no longer stand together. They are spaced so that they don't interact. Density in isolation is the ideal. Housing is not a problem. It has either been completely solved or totally left to chance. In the first case, it is legal, in the second, illegal. In the first case, towers, or usually slabs. In the second, a crust of impoverished hovels. One solution consumes the sky and the other the ground. It is strange that those with the least money inhabit the most expensive commodity, earth, and those who pay what is free, air. In either case, housing proves to be surprisingly accommodating. Not only does the population double every so many years, but also, with the loosening grip of the various religions, the average number of occupants per unit halves through divorce and other family dividing phenomena, with the same frequency that the city's population doubles. As its numbers swell, the generic city's density is perpetually on the decrease. The generic city is the apotheosis of the multiple choice concept. All boxes crossed, an anthology of all the options. Usually the generic city has been planned not in the usual sense of some bureaucratic organisation controlling its development, but as if various echoes, spores or tropes and seeds fell on the ground randomly as in nature and took hold, exploiting the natural fertility of the terrain, and now form an ensemble, an arbitrary gene pool that sometimes produces amazing results. The best definition of the aesthetic of the generic city is freestyle. How to describe it? Imagine an open space, a clearing in the forest, a levelled city. There are three elements: roads, buildings and nature, and they coexist in flexible relationships, seemingly without reason, in spectacular organisational diversity. Any one of the three may dominate. Sometimes the road is lost, to be found meandering on an incomprehensible detour. Sometimes you see no building, only nature, and then equally unpredictably, you're surrounded only by building. In certain frightening spots, all three are simultaneously absent. On these sites, actually, what is the opposite of a site? They're like holes bored through the concept of city. Public art emerges like the Loch Ness Monster, equal parts figurative and abstract, and usually self-cleaning. Specific cities still seriously debate the mistakes of architects. For instance, their proposals to create raised pedestrian networks with tentacles leading from one block to the next as a solution to congestion. But the generic city simply enjoys the benefits of their inventions. Decks, bridges, tunnels, motorways, a huge proliferation of the paraphernalia of connection, frequently draped with ferns and flowers as if to ward off original sin, creating a vegetal congestion more severe than a 50s science fiction movie. The roads are only for cars. People, pedestrians, are led on rides, as in an amusement park, on promenades that lift them off the ground, then subject them to a catalogue of exaggerated conditions. Wind, heat, steepness, cold, interior, exterior, smells, fumes, in a sequence that is a grotesque caricature of life in the historic city. There is horizontality in the generic city, but it is on the way out. It consists either of history that is not yet erased, or of Tudor-like enclaves that multiply around the centre as newly minted emblems of preservation. In spite of its absence, history is the major preoccupation, even industry, of the generic city. On the liberated grounds around the restored hovels, still more hotels are constructed to receive additional tourists in direct proportion to the erasure of the past. Its disappearance has no influence on their numbers, or maybe it is just a last-minute rush. Tourism is now independent of destination. Instead of specific memories, the associations of the generic city that the generic city mobilises are general memories, memories of memories. If not all memories at the same time, then at least an abstract token memory, a déjà vu that never ends, generic memory. Each generic city has a waterfront. Not necessarily with water, it can also be with desert, for instance, but at least an edge where it meets another condition, as if a position of near escape is the best guarantee for its enjoyment. Here, tourists congregate in droves around a cluster of stalls. Hordes of hawkers try to sell them the unique aspects of the city. The unique parts of all generic cities together have created a universal souvenir. It's a scientific cross between the Eiffel Tower, the Sacré-Cœur, and the Statue of Liberty. A tall building, usually between 200 and 300 metres, drowned in a small ball of water with snow, or, if close to the equator, gold flakes. Diaries with pockmarked leather covers, hippie sandals, even if real hippies are quickly repatriated. Tourists fondle these. Nobody has ever witnessed a sale. And then sit down in exotic eateries that line the waterfront. They run the full gamut of food today. Spicy, first and ultimately maybe the most reliable indication of being elsewhere. Patty, beef or synthetic. Raw, atavistic practice that will be very popular in the third millennium. Shrimp is the ultimate appetizer. Through the simplification of the food chain and the vicissitudes of preparation, they taste like English muffins, i.e. nothingness. Offices are still there, in ever greater numbers in fact. People say they are no longer necessary. In 5 to 10 years, we will all work at home. But then we will need bigger homes, big enough to use for meetings. Offices will have to be converted to homes. The only activity is shopping. But why not consider shopping as temporary, provisional? It awaits better times. It is our own fault. We didn't think of anything better to do. The same spaces inundated with other programmes, libraries, baths, universities, would be terrific. We would be awed by their grandeur. Hotels are becoming the generic accommodation of the generic city, its most common building block. That used to be the office, which at least implied a coming and a going, assumed the presence of other important accommodations elsewhere. Hotels are now containers that, in the expansion and completeness of their facilities, make almost all other buildings redundant. Even doubling the shopping malls, they are the closest we have to urban existence. 21st century style. The hotel now implies imprisonment, voluntary house arrest. There is no competing place left to go. You come and stay. Cumulatively, it describes a city of 10 million all locked in their rooms, a kind of reverse animation, density imploded. Culture. Only the redundant counts. In each time zone, there are at least 3 performances of cats. The world is surrounded by a Saturn's ring of meowing. The city used to be the great sexual hunting ground. The generic city is like a dating agency. It efficiently matches supply and demand. Orgasm instead of agony, there is progress. The most obscene possibilities are announced in the cleanest typography. Helvetica has become pornographic. Imagine a Hollywood movie about the Bible, a city somewhere in the Holy Land, market scene. From left and right, extras clothed in colourful rags, furs, silken robes walk into the frame yelling, gesticulating, rolling their eyes, starting fights, laughing, scratching their beards, hairpieces dripping with glue, thronging towards the centre of the image, waving sticks, fists, overturning stalls, trampling animals. People shout, selling wares, proclaiming futures, invoking gods. Purses are snatched, criminals pursued, or is it helped by the crowds? Priests pray for calm. Children run amok in an undergrowth of legs and robes. Animals bark, statues topple, women shriek. Threatened, ecstatic, the churning mass becomes oceanic. Waves break. Now switch off the sound. Silence, a welcome relief. And reverse the film. The now mute but still visibly agitated men and women stumble backwards. The viewer no longer registers only humans, but begins to note the spaces between them. The centre empties, and the last shadows evacuate the rectangle of the picture frame, probably complaining, but fortunately we don't hear them. Silence is now reinforced by emptiness. The image shows empty stalls, some debris that was trampled underfoot. Relief, it's over. That is the story of the city. The city is no longer. We can leave the theatre now. So that's the end. That's some of the excerpts from the generic city. Definitely do download the free PDF and have a read of the whole thing. And thank you so much for joining.